apologies, I'm not sharing video because when I do so, I tend to have Wi-Fi connectivity issues as well, because I'm now based in the countryside rather than a major town. And as you know, broadband speeds are not great. But I'm here to talk about, as I say, the cybercrime report that LexisNexis Risk Solutions Group do twice a year, and cover the aspects of what we're finding, give you the latest update. So this report is covering the first half of the year. What I will go into is give you an overview of the global view, look across different elements of the customer journey, look at some specific industries and see how that relates to the space that we're in, and different regions as well. Obviously, with this year, one of the big factors that you probably have to take into account is that initial view of COVID-19 across the globe and the impacts on the digital economy and changes, and a look at where we're going forward as well. Now, this report is available on the LexisNexis Risk website, so you can download the full report. I'm going to give you hopefully just a 30-slide view in the time we've got, if we can get through it in time. I do have a kind of 60-page version as well, and the report is pretty comprehensive and detailed. So if you wish to go into more details or see more information, please have a download. That's a freely accessible resource. So let me start having a look at the report and kind of go through how the report is structured and made up. So what we're looking at is we're looking at the first half of the year. So we cover 6 months of the year, as I say, twice a year when we produce this report. And we're looking at risks and attacks that are identified within the LexisNexis Digital Identity Network. That is a network analyzing multi-billions of transactions globally, digital transactions, things like opening new accounts, accessing services, processing online payments, covering a range of industries. And this is where people using that network use digital identity intelligence to try and distinguish who's a good customer, who's a bad customer, fraudsters, risks, etc. Now, in this first half of the year, we're looking at 22.5 billion transactions across the various industries and use cases. We're looking at elements like the devices utilized, the location behavior, threat information, automated attacks, manual interactions, network fraud attacks, etc. That allows us to derive the legitimacy. And when I'm talking about attacks or high-risk transactions in going through this report, what we're referring to is those that are classified in that manner by the customers utilizing the service. So this is not our reading of this. This is the actual end user who are utilizing these services defining these transactions as risky or a high risk or an attack. Included in this report, LexisNexis has been acquiring and merging in new companies over the past year. So we're also including insight from the Emailage data network as well. So for those who are aware of Emailage or email risk assessment, elements of insight are gathered from that network. So we're looking both across digital identity and Emailage information as well. So let's go to an overview of the report. So first of all, just kind of highlight that, obviously this year has been a significant change. FBI, the crime center, their internet crime center, they received almost as many fraud reports for this section of 2020, the first half of 2020, as they did for the whole of 2019, showing kind of scale and under change or nature of attacks that are happening in this digital space. We're seeing kind of reports and press and media information, and particularly locally in the UK, we've seen several highlights of this, of where exploitation of COVID-19, finance support packages have been manipulated by the fraudsters. So as we know, we're all experienced kind of fraud people. We know they jump on the, whatever scheme they can, where they can find an opportunity. They're usually the first in the queue. We're seeing elements of increased mule activity, where they're using kind of third parties, manipulating third parties to be utilized as a control point. And particularly again in economic uncertain times, that helps them recruit more mules to utilize. People are desperate for a few $100 here and there, and will, allow their data or their location or their services to be utilized by others. But what we did see as well, actually, is in that first half of the year, we actually see a reduction in actually human-initiated attacks. So attacks initiated by the individual. And that is probably self-evidentiary with the move to digital, the move to online-only services, meaning that an individual is not necessary to kind of transact part of the transaction or interaction that is happening. And again, if we think about that from the telecoms point of view, we may have previously sent people to stores to revalidate some forms of ID. Well, if the stores are closed, due to COVID and lockdowns in certain areas, then you can't do that. You've got to validate everything online. So actually manipulating that process by using online-based attacks and digital-based attacks and automation can actually help you manipulate that rather than relying on individuals to process that for you. And particularly high growth in bot attacks and scripted automated attacks that are happening and targeting, particularly at this moment, the financial sector and financial service institutions, those providing kind of loans and financial packages and manipulation, or maintaining and owning kind of credit and financial data for individuals as well. But for those of us in the telecom sector who offer quad play services, interesting thing was media was the only industry that actually recorded an overall growth rate in their attack year on year for the first 6 months of the year. And again, this is literally, again, if people are locked down or based from home, working from home now, more utilization of TV on demand, IPTV services, etc. You get that aspect of where credential sharing and manipulation of trials and service offers can be manipulated and targeted by both the standard individual looking to get something for free, as well as the organized fraudster. So when we're looking at these kind of things, so we're going to go through different kind of views: global view, journey view, COVID-19, industry, and a regional aspect. So looking at those, what I'm going to do is focus on global trends to start with. So just looking at those 22.5 billion transactions that happened in the digital economy that we're analysing, that's a 37% growth year on year. And of course, that's only the first half of the year. We expect the second half of the year probably even more growth because of more services moving online. What we're actually seeing, though, is that there's certain markets where that has grown particularly. So financial services have grown by over a third. E-commerce over a half, nearly a 50% growth in that kind of market. And of course, media, as we mentioned, in terms of transactions going on. But they're kind of made up of different factors. Yes, more services have had to move online. There's been that evidence of kind of, accelerate digital transformation projects in organizations. But we're also seeing those where it's actually a great growth of new customers and new to digital customers, obviously in this first 6 months. And a higher level of existing customer interaction. Obviously companies like Amazon, their growth and online delivery services, their growth in the first half of the year was huge. But also we've seen kind of other aspects of where we've seen the appropriate other decline in other industries, the travel and airline industries, etc. Their utilization of services have dropped, which is understandable. In terms of where the digital interactions are happening now, what we see now is a definite growth to mobile-based transactions, and that is where somewhere from us in the telecom industry should be kind of interested, is the fact that actually, the mainstay of digital transactions are moving through the mobile infrastructure and the app-based infrastructure rather than relying on desktop interactions. And that is important in terms of looking at how we're looking at customer data and how we're looking at customer interactions and how we manage those going forward. As I mentioned, human interactions and the human-initiated attacks declined, and kind of, but automated bots have grown. North America actually, I'm kind of good to highlight this, was only the only region that didn't record an increase in bot attacks. mainly because there was a reasonably high level in that region already, so it didn't have to catch up a great deal. But we have seen more bot attacks actually, again, being orchestrated from mobile devices as well, not just, you know, server-based enterprises that are initiating these attacks. So that kind of makes it interesting if you know, mobile is becoming not only the point of access for the customer, but the point of access for the attack initiation as well. In terms of, you know, automation, as I say, two main areas targeted: financial services and e-commerce, who both showed, you know, over a third of growth in terms of those markets being automated, and a reduced, you know, those same services showed a significant reduction in actual manual human-initiated attacks. Just to kind of highlight some of those kind of attacks and what they are, this is our identity abuse index, which is where we track all the risk transactions that are happening across our network, you know, over the period. And you can see here we're highlighting a couple of events, and again, there's a couple of things you can highlight from here in terms of the average scale of events. In terms of risk transactions out of all transactions that we process, it's around the, you know, 1 to 2% mark, and that is something that we often talk about in industry. When we talk about traditional telecoms fraud, we talk about fraud levels of 1 to 2%. You know, it's the same, you know, similar kind of vein in the e-commerce side and the digital side as well. That is kind of the average run rate, and then you get certain specific attacks which push up those levels significantly. So early in January, and this was obviously before lockdown, but obviously initiation of the kind of some of the COVID news potentially, is you see we had a financial service organization attacked, over kind of 4% levels, in terms of 4% of the transactions initiated as high level attacks or high risk attacks. And they were things where they were both trying to spoof the device and the IP that they were coming from. So creating new accounts in the US, with the attacks initiated, you know, both out of Hong Kong and the US. So it kind of, you know, shows a kind of the global nature of some of the attacks that are happening. We had a payment gateway services attacked again in late January, early February period. Media streaming one that was attacked in March, where they were creating, you know, fake accounts, you know, initiated from Spain, but, you know, they're again looking to try and hide or spoof what the device was, you know, make one device look like many to make it look like multiple individual customer interactions, but actually, you know, it was one, you know, controlled automated attack in the background. So there's different types of attack we see, different levels, and we see those kind of scales and scopes grow and diminish over time. When you actually look at this breakdown and look at global the identity abuse index over a period of time, you see peaks of activity as well. Peaks of activity happen, you know, around every major, you know, from a telecoms point of view, for the mobile, you know, players, wireless players in there, every major, you know, product launch, you know, Samsung product launch or iPhone launch, you'll have peaks of attacks around those periods, peaks of attacks around, you know, Black Friday options, and then the, you know, the major, you know, retail holidays as well. In terms of looking where attacks are coming from, when we look at human-initiated cyber attacks, you know, US is a number one contributor. You know, North America number 1 and 2. We've got, but actually interesting in there is situations where we've got high levels of fraud initiating now out of Brazil and Mexico, and places like, you know, India and Japan, which may not be necessarily something that would probably be, you know, conscious of and consider them maybe either not as digitally sophisticated or not, you know, not culturally associated with kind of fraud and criminal attacks. So actually seeing some of these countries kind of pop up in there, you know, kind of gives a different view and different standpoint of where they are. You know, usually, yes, UK, you know, US, UK, Canada, usually in the top 10, but, you know, the amount of attacks coming out of different regions now, showing it's a global point of view, is kind of interesting. And that's for human-initiated attacks. When we look at automated attacks, then some of those pictures could probably look a little bit more. Russia comes into play there in terms of into the top 10. But again, surprisingly, Japan recording kind of largest growth of origination of attacks is quite surprising. But again, with UK, parts of Western Europe, and North America, obviously being largest initiator of those attacks as well. And it just kind of points to where, even though those attacks may be targeted against countries either based in the US or based in the UK, fraud attacks now are global operations. And later on in the deck, I'll show how some of these are kind of networked and interact together as well. So looking at the transactions across the customer journey, there's various different touch points within a customer journey that we may be looking at to validate or identify and highlight various aspects of risk. Most common, obviously, is new accounts creations and creating new accounts online, new interaction, new customers coming on board in line. Now, there's been a growth and there's a high volume of new account creations within kind of the data set. But we're seeing like new account creations coming both from the mobile apps as well as browser apps. It used to be browser, used to be web-based browser, desktop-based browsers that would initiate attacks. We are seeing those initiated from the mobile devices now as well. Aspects of password resets, that's an obvious kind of target for account takeover, account compromise scenarios. Logons is where we're looking to manage, customer access. Who do we let access a service? How do we let them access a service? What controls do we wish to in place? And then the various actions that they may process through a self-service option. So are they changing their details? Are they transferring money around in terms of kind of mobile money transactions or financial transactions? Are they doing other updates on their account, adding on services, etc.? So there's various operations there where we see levels of attack and levels of growth. And obviously money transfer has been one of the highest ones where we've seen growth in this first 6 months. Again, that could be related to the fact that people are aware there's a possibility to identify some of these financial support schemes, obtain that money and then transfer the money away into mule accounts or utilize mule accounts to transfer the money to kind of clean accounts further down the chain and create a complexity in the chain of the operation that's happening. Payments has actually seen the highest growth. Again, that's not surprising because paying for everything online usually requires a payment, a card transaction. It takes away the kind of cash element you would have in a physical environment. But again, payment attacks based on mobile apps is a significant growth percentage as well. So what I'm going to go to next is look at different organizations, and with three here are chosen to actually nicely reflect aspects that we have in our telecoms marketplace. Financial services have a crossover with telecom services tend to be attacked in order to facilitate an account takeover and account manipulation on a financial services account. E-commerce, telecoms are retailing online, we're an e-commerce provider. So again, we have a relationship there and an understanding of and reflection of that marketplace. And yes, media, telecoms companies, if we're providing quad play IPTV services, content-based services, video on demand services, then we're a media player as well. So the media element and our industry categorization is relevant to us. In terms of financial services, new account creations, the highest growth rate of attack and continues to grow, but also a high level of payments as well, payment manipulation. Probably kind of, again, quite expected in this shift that we've had over this kind of first 6 months of this year. Just on the e-commerce side, mobile channel is particular growth, and again, new account creations, payments are the two main attack growth vectors there. And as I say, in terms of media, that was a record growth rate for media for the start of the year, and particularly related and particularly notable as the particularly March to April period, where, like for example, for the UK and a good portion of Europe were fully locked down, and I know in the US, several states had fully locked down kind of operations as well in that period. So looking at kind of financial services, to use as an example, what's going on. This is a Malaysian digital wallet provider. So really, this is kind of mobile money kind of transfer services, digital wallet services that they're looking to do. From the fraud perspective, what we saw was multiple account creations, then logons, and then processing initial kind of payment transactions, and trying to take advantage of any offers or bonuses that would be in progress as well. Get an extra 10% of the payment if you process 10 transactions in the first period. They targeted this company. The fraudsters were operating multiple accounts, but actually what they were doing was doing multiple accounts from a small number of devices. But what they thought they were doing across our network was hiding what that device was, and they thought they were able to spoof and manipulate the device details. And when I'm talking about device details here, I'm not talking in the normal telecom context of an IMEI, for example. We're talking to the wider kind of digital fingerprint that a device has, and it's based on several different factors. But it includes the kind of device type, but it also includes aspects of the the OS, the setup on the device, cookies, and tags that are placed on the device for assessment through every transaction. So that allows us to identify actually when somebody is trying to manipulate standard device fingerprinting techniques or device identification techniques, and it actually allows us to identify when it is a single device that's actually behind multiple pseudo devices and account credentials. So what we saw in this attack, that they were created a new account, initiated the first transaction, then triggered the kind of cashback promotions, but then would set up, reset up that service again, trying to make themselves look like multiple individuals adding on this service. But in the background, we actually can identify this is one bad actor in the background trying to manipulate the process. And he was using kind of virtual machine capabilities to try and manipulate and wipe and make it look like it was coming from different devices. But it shows how kind of it can be a sophisticated attack doing a very simple thing. From an e-commerce provider, if we use US mobile telecoms provider, on e-commerce. So again, from that perspective, we had an attack that targeted that network, looking, of course, for the high value handsets. That's kind of the most common kind of fraud e-commerce scenario we're dealing with in the mobile space at the moment. But then what they're looking to do, they were starting to test credentials. So they had credentials they'd obviously obtained, maybe from a data breach, maybe from a purchasing on the black market, as it were, looking to those credentials, high velocity creating new accounts within that mobile player. What they would do is, once they had one successful account, though, they would then look to use that account and maybe that device to then manipulate and place multiple orders for other hardware. So it was setting up of clean devices, inverted commas, brand new accounts, clean devices, and then using those devices to initiate multiple attacks and trying to, again, bypass different standard kinds of analysis where you're looking at simple things like have I got a velocity rule from the number of accounts being processed, look at standard device fingerprinting, but again we were able, the customer was able to use their kind of the technology, dynamic analysis of what was going on, identify where the spoofing of device was occurring, where actually some of these patterns were actually related, and information that were processed in the digital transaction was related. So maybe initiating from the same location, same IP, maybe the same Wi-Fi hotspot in a cafe, or a home router device where the attack was initiated from. We can actually identify that this was the same individuals coming through who were doing the initial setup of the clean device and then setting up and then utilizing that second device again with that stolen identity. So it shows how they're willing to set up some groundwork and homework and base work in terms of initiating a wider attack by setting up several what they thought were clean accounts in the first place. But once you're looking at the digital aspect and digital identity technology, it doesn't matter how many devices they necessarily use. We can actually start to tie these individuals in the background together as one individual. In EMEA, we had a gaming company who were processing transactions, and this was kind of manipulation of bonus abuse. So sign up for new customers, you'll get X amount of usage free or X amount of transactions free. In this case, as a gambling company, you get you're offered bonuses and utilization credits, so you can actually have more chance of winning kind of jackpots. You also had free trials that were initiated for a period of days as well. So of course, what the from a fraudster point of view, they look to create multiple accounts, work those devices together, manipulate them together to try and manipulate kind of winning opportunities and manipulate the actual offers that were on and their chances of winning kind of high values that they could then take and transfer those funds out of that account and to themselves. So again, in seeing this, pattern of attack was the fact that they were using multiple different devices, accounts, but utilizing a virtual machine in the background to actually simulate those devices. So actually, where they kind of, again, thought they were being clever and trying to set them up as looking like different devices, actually we could, figure out actually that was not the case, and, identify the multiple logons, multiple transactions from these, virtual machine single players, and therefore identify that kind of scenario. When we look at different regions and go into the different region aspects, that's kind of, just covered kind of a few examples in industry attacks. Looking at regions, now in terms of this graph, what you can see here is, okay, so the lighter orange color is LATAM, APAC is a darker blue, then North America and Europe in the light blue and red. And this is kind of the scale of attacks that are coming through. And you can see LATAM is the growing marketplace where we're seeing lots of growth and a higher level of attacks coming through in that marketplace. But even those that are lower down in North America and EMEA, still tracking that average 1% rate, but you can see big jumps occasionally happen time to time through that thing. So they, again, this is where organizations can orchestrate, fraud organizations orchestrate their attacks, initiate those attacks at the same time. And you can see early January, there was coordinated attacks that happened across North America, APAC and LATAM, in that same kind of January period. And then you've got transitional spikes again happening mid-January that happened in EMEA and APAC and LATAM and so on. And it's kind of little spikes that correlate with each other. So where some of these attacks happen, they happen globally, not just regionally. If we look at APAC, breaking it down, get a different view. So India is the top attacker by volume. It's a human-initiated attacks dropping, but growth and automated attacks. Now, India is attacking, but where are they attacking? They're attacking the UK, US, Canada, and Australia are their top 5 attack locations. So we see, even though the attacks are initiated out of India, it's not only their own region they're attacking, what they think are the kind of easier but more well-established targets where there's more bang for their buck in terms of operation. They can get higher revenue and higher returns by attacking well-established digital economies. If we look at the EMEA, I can proudly say, being in the UK, that yes, we're the initiator of the largest attacks by volume. But again, it shows this first half of the year, human-initiated attacks, actually 20% reduction, but automation has grown significantly. So again, at the 270 million automated bot attacks at the start in that first half of the year, which is a 45% growth on previous years. And again, interestingly here is some of the regions we're attacking. Yes, we're attacking North America, but then we're attacking Northern Europe as well. And if you look at, you might kind of say Latvia, Sweden, why does that make sense? Well, Sweden is particularly a very digitalized economy. They have digital identity, government-controlled digital identity platforms and electronic identity systems. So if you can manipulate those and attack those, you can actually get very profitable results out of that from a fraud perspective. So that kind of explains why kind of that may be there. US and Canada is a more purely kind of scale and operation and capability perspective. LATAM, Brazil is the highest initiator of fraud issues. But interestingly for Brazil, they target the US and the UK and then target their local region. So it's kind of different to the India picture, which was mostly elsewhere. Brazil is also attacking within their own region, as well as the digital economies of the UK and the US. Again, automated bot attacks. Volumes aren't as high, but it's growing, and that is the kind of thing. And of course, they were initiating the attacks that coincided with the COVID-19 in that region. So the attack of those localized regions. And again, I don't know what financial packages or incentives were brought in Argentina and Chile during the any COVID lockdown period, but that may have been the target of attack in that scenario. For the US, I know we have obviously a lot of the US audience on here. So the US, from North America, of course, the US is number one in terms of attack. But actually, again, if you look at the attack locations, yes, you attack your neighbors, best friends with your neighbors, and we have our special relationship with the UK, so of course you attack the UK. But then, Latvia and Australia, very interesting little target destinations there. I say Latvia, a very well-established digital economy and digital identity and identification platform for their citizens. And then, Australia, which is an interesting one. Again, they are going towards digital identification for their citizens as well. So it's an interesting kind of factor, that one, where the crossover is there. The good news for North America is it kind of stayed level in terms of how it was operating. So it's not massive declines, but not massive, no massive growth rates either. So that kind of points to a digital economy is slightly further advanced, digital financial economy is slightly further advanced. So therefore, the attack levels necessarily aren't as high and growing as they are in other regions. Just to highlight how some of this fraud goes on, this is a lovely messy diagram in the middle there, and I appreciate it may be a bit small for people to see depending on the size of their screen. But what we wanted to highlight here is actually the scale of network fraud. So in this fraud operation that was shut down, you've got multiple online retailers that are actually operating in the US. We've got a payment gateway that operates within Japan, and then we've got travel companies and online marketplaces in LATAM, and they are all linked to the same fraud operation. So the attacks that each of those groups are suffering is all linked to the same fraud operation. We've got crossovers on devices that are being utilized, the emails that are being utilized, the telephone numbers that are being utilized in the kind of fraud attacks and associations. And each connection on this diagram shows confirmed event connection across those two operations. So below you see lots of multiple e-tailers across North America, commerce sites, marketplaces as well as retail stores, travel industry sites, as well as phone links, device links, operational links as well. In terms of some of those stats, I think on those is, here's another element of where we've got a UK banking fraud network. In this one, we've got one fraud network attacking 10 different financial organizations, utilizing 7,000, over 7,000, nearly 8,000 devices, over 5,000 different email addresses, and over 1,000 telephone numbers. So if we think about that from a telecoms perspective, that's 1,000 accounts in our perspective that are being used to manipulate this attack, and how many of those were actually manipulated themselves as well. And we can see transactions that are connected by fraudulent email, telephone numbers. We can see transactions that are carried out by the same kind of fraud ring and cross correlations. And in this particular attack, there's over kind of 70 million exposed in that orchestrated attack. And of course, when they orchestrate it in this way, attacking multiple networks, their idea is that one company can only see them one at a time. The beauty of the digital identity network is we're seeing these transactions both on this scale and this scale of where we're seeing all these transactions interrelated, so we can correlate and identify the risk at a simpler level, and shut these kind of operations down a lot quicker than they could be by an individual organization. And utilizing aspects of kind of sharing information as well as we do in the CFCA, if you can share information on these attacks, that can be even more well orchestrated. And I kind of go, here we've got a couple of main kind of telephone numbers and emails. If I go to the previous diagram as well, we can see, the purple lines in the previous diagram are telephone numbers, the red lines are email addresses, and the yellow lines are kind of device relationships. And you can see how complicated and how interactive, how correlated these attacks are in these kind of scenarios. So kind of moving on, let's have a look at, the thing we're all living at the moment, COVID-19, and the impact on digital businesses. Now, probably quite expected and self-explanatory from what is going on. We're seeing increases in transactional volume in certain industries and decreases elsewhere. So what are we seeing increases in? Maybe kind of self-evident, but yes, government services, accessing government information, again, financial packages, support packages, those kind of things as well. Personal finance, and like in the UK over the past few months, we've had a growth in the housing market and sales market, and some growth in the transactional market as well in terms of e-commerce particularly. Yes, e-commerce growth was huge, particularly those selling obviously food, entertainment services, and people delivery at home services. Interestingly enough, though, growth in cryptocurrency, digital wallets, and marketplaces as well. So maybe people are having the marketplace, maybe people are having a clear out, trying to get some revenue in while they're suffering through this period. But digital wallets and cryptocurrency, are interesting of the financial nature of moving to digital. And which way do they go? Do they go traditional bank, online, digital, or do they look at some of the newer fintechs and purely online digital services that are becoming available and payments as they're becoming available in this marketplace? Decreases, yes, we saw decreases in both sport events and travel. Surprise, surprise, because a lot of that was shut down. Charity interactions as well, heavily impacted. People were not giving their money away, as it were. They're keeping it very, very close to home, and that was shown in terms of the fact that gift card transactions and gaming and gambling transactions as well. Interestingly, online dating, even though online services grew, online dating actually dropped in terms of transactional volume. Again, maybe because you can meet somebody online, but if you can't eventually meet them, maybe there's that takes away that incentive to use those kind of marketplaces. In terms of what we saw, though, and looking at kind of from a transaction element, the graph on the right, the bright orange pieces show actually the growth of new devices and new interactions we saw on the global identity network. And this, of course, this is people who are new to digital. So those people who used to always go to the shops and stores, go to their local bank to transact, go to their local pharmacy operation, those people that had to start transacting online. So there was a big growth across the whole period, but particularly obviously where major countries had their full lockdown periods in kind of the March, April, May area. You can see the growth there, where we're seeing new devices, new digital identities being created from these new people coming on board. Now, in the past, I would have said last year, if you saw a new digital identity, there was a higher level of fraud risk associated with that, because most people who were transacting online were already transacting online. In this respect, this has been a big shift of pushing those who purely used to transact physically and have had to transact online and have to take that step through. And we see that growth in there. And obviously, organizations have had to push that particularly. And if we take the fraud element here, that means they've had to push some of what they were considered high risk services or data, where there's a kind of high data risk in some of those services, where previously they wanted to keep them very much under control. They've had to push those services online, and that means obviously if there is then a fraud risk, or fraud occurring in that transaction, that the impact is going to be higher from this kind of online capability. So yes, we saw a big shift online, big new digital identities, big new devices, changing the way operations were targeting their services. And I'll pick somebody I know. I was reading the Vodafone, because I own shares in Vodafone and Vodafone Group, and I was reading their report from March, the start of March. And in March, obviously they produced and probably wrote their report back in December. They were saying, well, we want, we're getting across the group, we want to target between 20 and 30% of our services to be online. Of course, with COVID, that totally changed. You had to start targeting 80, 90, 100% of your services being online in countries where there were full lockdowns, and those retail stores were actually closed, because if you didn't transact online, you had no customers and you had no revenue coming in. So that is, significantly accelerated Vodafone's plans for digital transformation, for example, and we're seeing that across the board, across all different industries. When we look at online banking, we see, obviously the growth in online banking, but particularly in that, late March, early April period, going to May period, where we start to see, massive growth of online banking customers. But interestingly, that's kind of evenly distributed between web and mobile app. And the push to mobile app services, seen as securer, which, from a fraud perspective, there is lower fraud transactions via mobile app, but actually we're seeing mobile app initiated attacks grow. So the fraudsters are realizing they're having to move away from desktop, web, traditional, browser-based services to manipulating and taking over, the mobile app type services. Just to go through, again, one example of where we're seeing that particularly is in the UK, and obviously I can talk from that perspective, so which is why I picked this example, where the UK gave businesses bounce back loans. So it's not just corporate individuals, businesses were given loans kind of based on their turnover revenue. You could take up to an amount in loans. And so we saw a huge increase in fraudulent activity on these kind of loan applications. So where they've gone and upgraded their consumer account to a business account to meet the loan criteria and then applied for the loan services as a business, where they've applied for multiple loan applications, but actually in the background, it's the same individual, same organization doing those loan applications, but they're trying to make it look like they're different organizations. And so in the UK, setting up a company, setting up a origination of being registered as a business is a very, very, very quick and easy process you can do online. So the fact you can actually do that, yourself, you can create new accounts, new business to then take advantage of these loan kind of opportunities. The other thing they targeted was actually targeting maybe small businesses, individual consumer, self-employed type businesses, to say, look, we'll do these loan applications for you and do a kind of, inverted commas, revenue share with them, give them some money where they weren't going to apply, but actually apply for those services as well, or utilize mule accounts and pay them to utilize their banking, maybe their dormant or not in use company details to apply for loan services as well. And those who are particularly suffering may be attracted to those kind of scams and schemes. And again, in the UK, I'm sorry to use the UK as an example, but in the UK, there was a portion of the population who were self-employed and ran their own businesses as freelancers that actually, at the time of the implementation of the loans, were not included in the criteria. So they were the kind of people who would be prepared to potentially offer their business details if there's somebody who could find a way to apply for those criteria and get that revenue in. Again, across the digital identity network, the beauty of the digital identity network is we can start to link these individuals together and link these transactions together, link these operations, and actually target that behavior so you can stop that in real time happening, which is something of, utilizing, cross-network information gives you that advantage. E-commerce going through, particularly identity spoofing for account takeovers scenario. And what we're seeing here is actually, again, from April to June, particularly where there's some of those strict lockdown periods we're in, we're looking to see, okay, automated bots are using testing stolen credentials, try and take over the account, try and manipulate the e-commerce merchant that was there, do fake purchases, etc. Not going to be paid for, or transacting using dodgy transaction details. But again, they'd gain these details, initiating account takeovers using information that may have been compromised 6-12 months ago, but just waiting for such an opportunity. And the shift to online transacting, and the shift that actually some retailers had to do in terms of transacting online, meant maybe their controls and things weren't in place as they should be, means that they're going to be the target of attacks. And seeing where those attacks were originating from, particularly from the US, but from Russia, from Vietnam, Japan. These are kind of strange locations you would not necessarily associate with initiating these attacks, but actually started to do so. E-commerce, same kind of growth, kind of materials. See payments particularly kind of growing dramatically over the period. We're seeing pockets of attacks as well in terms of attack rates. Again, you can see the dark kind of blue areas of where particularly the kind of May period and through April, March, April, where there were patterns of attack that were coming through, and you're seeing spikes of attack in May, surprisingly. And again, maybe where they started to see lockdowns may start to be eased. So let's get as many attacks in that online period where we can use identities before people start transacting and opening up transacting in the physical space as well. So certain targets in the e-commerce space that start to see kind of where that was going, but that that main lockdown period, and then it's kind of eased off slightly, but the ease off is still at a higher level than the initiated original point, going back into last year. And looking at that, looking at example, where we're looking at e-commerce provider, first party chargeback fraud. So actually where they're looking at, it's the actual end consumer who may be, falsely claiming that fraud was committed against them in order to help them with their kind of, financial situation. So, the legitimate owners of the credit card are the ones falsely are claiming fraud against them, maybe because they're suffering with lockdown in terms of financially situation is tight. Not the type of person who would probably normally commit fraud against you, but we're starting to see that growth. And as you can see, US lockdown kind of periods where they're brought in, kind of where we've seen those kind of spikes of activity over those next 3 months, the latter 3 months of the first half of the year, and seeing those transactions come through. So having spoken and waffled on for a long period of time, just to kind of summarize what we've seen so far, and to say this is a brief summary of the slides. So these, I've got a slide deck that's this is a 30 slide deck. I've got a 60 plus slide deck, and I've got a 90 plus slide deck, but the report includes kind of all these pieces in much more detail that can be provided to you. But what are we seeing? What have we seen over this first 6 months? It's a digital environment. Yeah, it's in flux. In flux because of COVID, yes, and the acceleration of digital transformation for some of these organizations. People have had to move online, been forced to move online, been forced to transact online, and not all these operations have got their securest online operations in place. So fraudsters have also adapted. I know our review when we've been talking in the telecom industry, we've seen shifts in fraud, because they couldn't transact fraudulently in the retail stores. That may have been our greater proportion of fraud to start with, but actually the shift has been now they're transacting online. Now we're going to see that growth of fraud in that online space, and the fraudsters will slowly or quickly, in some circumstances, figure out where they need to attack, how they need to attack in those new fraud operations, and there may be a few more holes there than we expect. They've targeted both business and consumer operations and attacked government-backed packages where they've existed. In terms of their attack patterns, automation seems to be the growth area, and trying to spoof both identity. And they are starting to understand some aspects of it. They're understanding that people may be looking at simplistic controls like device aspects. So they look, what's going to be catching them is the wider understanding of a digital identity, and that will grow and continue. We see growth in mule and first-party frauds because of economic uncertainty. People are more desperate in terms of their own financial situation, so more willing to gain, get-rich-quick schemes, or be manipulated in terms of schemes, or be manipulated in terms of social engineering as well, in terms of pass on their details without realizing, because they are new to performing transactions digitally, therefore more likely to fall for the various phishing scams that are out there. What we can see though is actually the other way around, is as people move online, actually utilizing digital identity intelligence, utilizing understanding of kind of fraud risk, we can actually help the other way, because hopefully, as we said, it's only 1 or 2% of the transactions that are going to be fraudulent and high risk. That means the other 98% are good, trusted customers. So if you can identify them and tag them and mark them as good, trusted customers, that can smooth any future process. So you don't have to always step up a customer or do a one-time password on every single transaction. So therefore, therefore it allows you to create a better customer experience, but also control your fraud elements. And with that, what we've seen across our network is our, the customers and companies that we're helping leverage that intelligence can both, enable you to, validate trust internally and externally, but also share intelligence across industries as well, and actually help identify where these fraud attacks are happening across industry. So with that, I will kind of finish and open up to any kind of questions and say, thank you for listening for those that have.